trust is the slowest poison there is. It doesn't kill you in one swallow. It seeps into your bones, settles in your lungs, and waits until you're so comfortable you forget it's even there. And then, one ordinary Tuesday morning, it stops your heart cold. My name is Dorothy Mae Williams, and I learned that the people who smile the widest are often the ones sharpening the knife behind their backs. I remember the exact moment everything changed. It wasn't dramatic. There were no screams, no shattered glass, just my grandson Marcus standing in my kitchen, his tie perfectly knotted, his cologne expensive, his smile warm as summer honey. "Grandma Dot," he said, voice smooth as silk, "I need to talk to you about your future, your security." Those words should have comforted me. Instead, they were the first cracks in a foundation I'd spent 72 years building. Because security, I would soon learn, was just another word for theft when it came from the mouth of someone you loved without question. I'd raised that boy, not from birth, but close enough. When his mother, my daughter Angela, got sick, really sick, the kind of sick that hollows you out from the inside, I stepped in. Marcus was 14 then, all elbows and attitude, grief sitting heavy on his shoulders like a coat too big for his frame. I fed him. I held him when he cried in the dark. I sat through parent-teacher conferences, graduation, college visits. I was there, always there. And when Angela finally lost her battle 3 years later, it was my arms that caught him when he fell apart at the funeral. My voice that whispered, "I've got you, baby. I've got you." So when he showed up that Tuesday, briefcase in hand, talking about protecting me, I didn't see the predator. I saw the boy I'd saved. And that blindness almost cost me everything. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon rolls, fresh from the oven, the way he liked them when he was young. Steam curled up from my coffee mug, catching the morning light that filtered through lace curtains I'd hung 40 years ago. Everything felt safe, familiar, mine. "Grandma," Marcus said, pulling out documents from his briefcase with practiced ease, "you're not getting any younger. No offense, but have you thought about what happens if something happens to you? Who manages your accounts? Your property? This house?" I stirred my coffee slowly, the spoon clinking against porcelain, a small sound that suddenly felt too loud. "I've got a will, baby. Everything's in order." He smiled, but there was something behind it now, something I couldn't quite name. "A will is good," he said, his voice dropping to that tone people use when they think you don't understand. "But it's not enough. Not in today's world. What you need is a power of attorney. Someone you trust to handle things if you can't. And Grandma," he leaned forward, his hand covering mine, warm and firm, "I want to be that person for you. I want to protect you." The words landed soft, like snow, but underneath, I felt something cold begin to spread. Power of attorney. I'd heard those words before, whispered in church pews when Sister Hawkins lost her house, when Deacon Murray's kids cleaned out his accounts before he even knew what hit him. But this was Marcus. My Marcus, the boy who used to fall asleep with his head in my lap during Sunday service, the young man who called me every week, who brought me groceries, who fixed my leaky faucet without being asked. Surely he wouldn't. Surely I was just being paranoid, an old woman whose mind was playing tricks. So I said what grandmothers say when they want to believe the best. "Let me think about it, honey. Give me a few days." His smile tightened, just a fraction, just enough for me to notice if I'd been paying attention. But I wasn't. I was too busy convincing myself I was wrong about the chill creeping up my spine. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus became a constant presence. He'd stop by after work, always with some small gift, Chinese takeout, a bouquet of flowers, a new thriller novel he thought I'd like. We'd sit at the kitchen table and he'd ask me questions, casual, easy, like we were just chatting. "How much do you think the house is worth now, Grandma? When was the last time you checked your retirement accounts? Do you remember setting up that trust fund for me when I graduated college?" Each question felt harmless on its own. But together they formed a pattern, a map of everything I owned, everything I'd worked for, everything I'd built over 7 decades of scrubbing floors, teaching elementary school, saving every dollar I could squeeze from a modest salary. I began to feel like I was being inventoried, cataloged, assessed for value, and the feeling made my stomach turn. But doubt is a terrible companion when you're alone. It whispers in the silence of a big, empty house where your husband's voice used to echo, where your daughter's laughter used to fill the halls. It asks you if you're being unfair, if you're punishing someone for crimes they haven't committed, if loneliness is making you suspicious of the only family you have left. So I pushed it down, that doubt, buried it deep beneath decades of love and loyalty, until the day I went to the mailbox and found the letter. Plain white envelope, official-looking, return address from some law firm I'd never heard of. My hands shook as I tore it open, my reading glasses sliding down my nose as I scanned the words. Confirmation of power of attorney transfer. Effective immediately, Marcus Jerome Williams is granted full authority over all financial and legal matters concerning Dorothy Mae Williams. My vision blurred. The paper crumpled in my fist. I hadn't signed anything. I hadn't authorized this. But somehow, someway, my signature was there at the bottom, neat and official, binding me to a decision I never made. The world tilted. I grabbed the porch railing, my knees threatening to give out beneath me. 72 years of independence, of fighting for every inch of ground I stood on, and it had been stolen with a forged signature and a smile. I stumbled back inside, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might crack through my ribs. I needed to see it for myself, needed to confirm what my gut already knew. I pulled out my bank statements from the desk drawer, the ones I kept meticulously organized in labeled folders. Joint account with Marcus Jerome Williams. When had that happened? I flipped through pages, my breath coming faster, my hands trembling so badly I could barely hold the paper. Transfers, withdrawals, thousands of dollars moved from my savings into accounts I didn't recognize. And there, in neat digital print, the authorization signature. Mine. Except it wasn't. Not really. I don't know how long I sat there staring at those numbers, watching my life's savings bleed out across pages of transactions I never approved. Time became thick, heavy, pressing down on my chest like a stone. I thought about calling the police. I thought about calling my lawyer. But instead, I did something I hadn't done in years. I broke down. I cried. Not the gentle tears of an old woman mourning her past. No. These were the raw, ugly sobs of someone who'd been gutted, betrayed, hollowed out by the one person she thought she could trust without question. When Marcus came by that evening, his face was all concern, all warmth, all lies. "Grandma, you okay? You look upset." I stood in the doorway, blocking his entry, my body rigid with a rage so cold it felt like ice in my veins. "Did you forge my signature?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "Did you take my money?" For just a moment, just a flash, I saw it. The mask slipped. His eyes went hard, his jaw tightened, and I saw the truth plain as day. Then, just as quickly, the mask returned and he laughed, a sound so casual it was almost convincing. "Grandma, what are you talking about? You're confused. Maybe you should sit down." "I'm not confused," I whispered, and my voice was colder than I'd ever heard it. "I know what you did." He stepped closer, and for the first time in my life, I felt afraid of him. This boy I'd raised, this man I'd loved. "Grandma," he said slowly, "you're old. You forget things. You signed those papers. You asked me to help you. And if you start making accusations, people are going to think you're losing it. They're going to think you need to be in a home, somewhere safe, somewhere supervised." The threat hung in the air between us, clear as daylight. Comply or lose everything. Not just my money, but my freedom, my dignity, my independence. I felt my knees weaken, but I didn't let him see it. "Get out," I said quietly. "Get out of my house." He smiled, slow and cruel. "It's not just your house anymore, Grandma. Remember? I have power of attorney. Legally, I could move you out tomorrow if I wanted to." And then he left, whistling, as he walked down my porch steps, as if he hadn't just shattered my entire world. I stood there in the doorway, the night air cold against my face, my heart hammering in my chest. And in that moment, I made a decision. I wasn't going to be a victim. I wasn't going to let him take everything I'd built. I was going to fight, but not the way he expected. Not with tears or pleas or desperate phone calls. No, I was going to fight the way a woman who'd survived 72 years of this world knows how to fight. With patience, with strategy, with the kind of cold, calculated fury that comes from knowing you have nothing left to lose. And Marcus, my sweet, greedy, treacherous grandson, was about to learn that you don't underestimate a woman who's already buried everyone she loved. Because I wasn't finished yet. Not by a long shot. The first night after he threatened me, I didn't sleep. I sat in my late husband James's old recliner, the leather cracked and worn from 40 years of his weight settling into the same spots, and I stared at the ceiling, listening to the house creak and settle around me. Every sound felt like a warning. Every shadow looked like an intruder. I'd spent 72 years building this fortress of independence, and in less than a month, my own blood had breached the walls. But rage, real rage, the kind that comes from betrayal so deep it touches bone, that rage doesn't burn hot and fast. It simmers, it waits. And as dawn broke through my bedroom curtains, painting the walls in shades of pink and gold, I realized something crucial. Marcus had made one critical mistake. He'd assumed I was weak. He'd assumed I was alone. He'd assumed I was just an old woman too tired to fight back. He had no idea who he was dealing with. I started that morning the way I'd started every morning for the past 50 years. I made coffee, strong and black, the way James used to drink it. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd fed Marcus breakfast before school, where I'd helped him with homework, where I'd celebrated his college acceptance letter with tears of pride streaming down my face. And I began to plan, not with emotion, not with the tears that had consumed me the night before, but with the cold, methodical precision of a woman who taught elementary school for 35 years and knew exactly how to spot a cheater, a liar, a manipulator. I pulled out a notebook, one of those old composition books with the black and white marbled cover, and I started writing. Every transaction I could remember, every conversation that felt off, every time Marcus had asked a question that seemed innocent but wasn't, every document he'd casually mentioned, every signature he'd needed for just one little thing. Grandma, it's no big deal. Patterns emerged like constellations in a night sky, and the picture they painted made my blood run cold. By mid-morning, I'd made my first call, not to the police, not to a lawyer, but to someone I should have called weeks ago. My friend Carolyn, who'd worked as a paralegal for 40 years before retiring. Her voice came through the phone, warm and familiar, and when I told her everything, when I laid out the whole sordid mess, there was a long silence on the other end. Then she said something that changed everything. "Dorothy, honey, you need to see a lawyer immediately. But before you do, you need to gather evidence, because if he's forged documents, if he's moved money without authorization, he's committed fraud. But proving it when he has power of attorney is going to be tricky. We need to be smart about this. That single word, that promise of solidarity nearly broke me all over again, because I wasn't alone. I'd thought I was, sitting in my big empty house with ghosts and memories for company. But I wasn't, and that realization gave me strength I didn't know I still had. Over the next week, I became a detective in my own life. I went through every drawer, every file cabinet, every box in the attic. I found documents I didn't remember signing, statements for accounts I didn't remember opening, transfers I'd never authorized. But I also found something else, something that made my stomach drop through the floor. Life insurance policies, 3 of them, all taken out in the last 6 months, all with Marcus listed as the sole beneficiary, all with my signature neat and official at the bottom. And the total value, if I died, would be just over $2 million. I had to sit down, my legs giving out beneath me, the papers scattering across the hardwood floor. This wasn't just theft. This wasn't just fraud. Marcus wasn't content to drain my account slowly. He was planning for my death. And maybe, the thought crept in cold and terrible, maybe he was planning to help it along. I started paying attention to things I'd ignored before. The way Marcus always insisted on making my coffee when he visited. The pills he'd brought me last month, saying my doctor had changed my prescription, even though I hadn't been to the doctor in months. The food he'd drop off, always prepared, always convenient, always eaten alone because he had to rush off to some meeting or appointment. Had I been too trusting? Had I been consuming my own demise 1 meal, 1 cup, 1 pill at a time? Paranoia is a terrible thing. It makes you doubt everything, question everyone, see danger in every kindness. But sometimes, I realized, paranoia is just pattern recognition for people who've been burned. And I'd been burned so badly, I could still smell the smoke. That Sunday, I did something I hadn't done in months. I went to church. Not to pray, though God knows I needed to, but to talk to people, to remind myself that I was part of a community, that I had friends, that I had witnesses to my life and my sanity. Sister Hawkins grabbed my arm after service, her grip surprisingly strong for a woman pushing 80. "Dorothy May," she whispered, her eyes sharp behind thick glasses, "I need to talk to you." We sat in the fellowship hall, surrounded by the smell of fried chicken and collard greens, and she told me a story that made my blood run cold. Her grandson had done the same thing 5 years ago, forged documents, drained accounts, isolated her from family and friends. By the time she realized what was happening, she'd lost her house, her savings, everything. She was living in a 1-bedroom apartment now, dependent on Social Security and the charity of the church. "I looked at you last week," she said, her voice dropping to barely a whisper, "and I saw the same look in your eyes that I had back then. That lost look, that betrayed look, and I knew, whatever's happening to you, baby, fight it. Fight it with everything you've got. Because once they take it all, once you've got nothing left, they disappear, and you're left with just the memory of who you used to be." I left church that day with a fire in my belly I hadn't felt in years. I called Carolyn, and she connected me with a lawyer, a sharp young woman named Keisha Rothman, who specialized in elder abuse cases. We met at her office Monday morning, and I laid everything out on her desk: documents, bank statements, the forged power of attorney, the life insurance policies I never authorized. She went through it all with a practiced eye, her expression growing darker with every page she turned. "Mrs. Williams," she said finally, looking up at me with a mixture of anger and sympathy, "this is one of the most brazen cases of financial exploitation I've seen. Your grandson has committed multiple felonies: fraud, forgery, theft, possibly conspiracy if anyone helped him. But here's the problem. Right now, he has legal authority over your finances. If we go to court to challenge this, he could freeze your accounts, claim you're incompetent, even try to have you declared unfit to manage your own affairs. We need to be strategic. We need to gather more evidence. And we need to move fast before he realizes you're onto him." She outlined a plan. We'd get a forensic accountant to trace every transaction. We'd get a handwriting expert to prove the signatures were forged. We'd file for an emergency guardianship hearing to revoke his power of attorney. And we'd do it all quietly, quickly, before he saw it coming. But it was going to take time. Weeks, maybe months. And during that time, I'd have to pretend everything was normal. I'd have to smile at Marcus, let him into my house, act like I didn't know he was planning to rob me blind or worse. I'd have to become an actress in my own life, playing the role of the trusting grandmother while I built a case to destroy him. "Can you do that?" Keisha asked, her dark eyes searching mine. "Can you look him in the face, knowing what he's done, and pretend you don't know?" I thought about Angela, my daughter, Marcus's mother. I thought about how she'd fought cancer with grace and dignity, how she'd smiled through the pain, how she'd told me with her last breath to take care of her boy. I thought about how I'd failed her, how the boy I'd raised had become a monster, and I felt something inside me harden into steel. "Yes," I said quietly, "I can do it, because I'm not just fighting for my money or my house. I'm fighting for every woman who's ever been betrayed by someone they loved, every grandmother who's been robbed by greedy children, every elder who's been silenced and dismissed and told they're too old to matter. I'm fighting because someone has to. And if Marcus thinks I'm going to lie down and let him destroy me, he's got another thing coming." The next time Marcus came over, I was ready. I'd practiced in the mirror, rehearsed my lines, prepared my performance. When I opened the door, I made sure my smile looked tired, defeated, just broken enough to make him think he'd won. "Hey, baby," I said softly, my voice trembling just a little. "Come on in." He strutted through my door like he owned the place, which I supposed he thought he did. His confidence was sickening, but I swallowed my rage and played my part. I made him coffee, my hands shaking as I poured, and I apologized. "I'm sorry I got upset the other day," I said, keeping my eyes down, submissive. "I guess I was confused. You're right. I do forget things sometimes." The smile that spread across his face was pure victory, and it took everything in me not to throw the hot coffee in his smug face. "It's okay, Grandma," he said, his tone patronizing, dripping with false compassion. "I understand. That's why you need me to help you. That's why you need to trust me." He pulled out more papers from his briefcase, and I signed them without reading. just like he wanted. I became the compliant old woman he needed me to be. And all the while my phone was in my pocket, recording every word, every threat, every manipulation. If you've ever had to smile at someone who's betraying you, if you've ever had to pretend everything's fine while your world is crumbling, let me know in the comments below, because there's a special kind of strength it takes to swallow your pride, to play the fool, to become invisible so you can strike when they least expect it. And I was learning that strength one painful day at a time. The weeks that followed were a careful dance. Marcus increased his visits, always checking on me, always subtly reminding me of his control. He'd ask to see my medication, count my pills, suggest I needed to see a doctor about my memory. He was building a case, I realized, creating a paper trail that showed I was declining, incompetent, unreliable. If I tried to challenge him, he'd paint me as a confused old woman whose own grandson was just trying to help. It was brilliant, really, in a sick, twisted way. But two could play that game. I started visiting my doctor regularly, getting cognitive tests done, documenting my mental acuity. I joined a seniors book club, attended every church function, made sure I was visible and engaged and clearly of sound mind. I created my own paper trail, one that would prove I was sharp, capable, and fully aware of what was being done to me. But Marcus was getting bolder. Money was disappearing faster now. Large withdrawals, transferred to accounts I couldn't access. When I asked about it, playing my role of concerned but confused grandmother, he'd pat my hand and say it was for investments, for protecting my future, for making sure I'd be taken care of. The lies rolled off his tongue so smoothly I almost admired the skill. Almost. Then came the day that nearly broke me. I got a call from my bank, a courtesy call, they said, confirming that I wanted to close out my remaining savings account and transfer everything to my grandson's personal account. I felt the room spin, my vision darkening at the edges. "No," I managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. "No, I don't authorize that." There was confusion on the other end of the line, some checking of records, and then the apologetic explanation. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Williams, but we have authorization here with your signature and your power of attorney on file. The transfer is already processing. It'll be complete by end of business today." I hung up and called Keisha immediately, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial. "He's taking everything," I told her, tears streaming down my face. "We're running out of time." She moved fast. Emergency motions were filed, court dates were set, but the legal system moved slowly, agonizingly slowly, and Marcus was moving at lightning speed. By the time we got our hearing scheduled, I had less than $5,000 left in accounts that once held over $400,000. My retirement savings, gone. My emergency fund, gone. The money I'd set aside for my funeral, for my final expenses, so I wouldn't be a burden to anyone, gone. All of it funneled into Marcus's accounts, into investments I'd never see, into a future that didn't include me, except as a cautionary tale. And the worst part, the part that kept me up at night, staring at the ceiling, listening to my heart pound in the darkness, was that I still had to see him, still had to smile, still had to pretend I didn't know he was robbing me blind. Then came the night everything changed. I woke up at 2 a.m. to the sound of someone in my house, footsteps, soft and careful, moving through the downstairs. My heart seized in my chest, terror flooding my veins like ice water. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, my fingers fumbling in the dark, and that's when my bedroom door opened. Marcus stood in the doorway, backlit by the hallway light, a silhouette that should have been familiar and comforting, but instead looked like something from a nightmare. "Grandma," he said softly, and there was something in his voice that made my blood run cold. "We need to talk about your living situation, about what's best for you." He stepped into the room, and I saw he wasn't alone. There was a woman with him, middle-aged, professional-looking, carrying a clipboard. "This is Sandra," he said, gesturing to her. "She's from Sunset Grove Senior Living. I've arranged for you to move there tomorrow. It's a lovely facility. You'll be much safer there, much better cared for." The words hit me like a physical blow. He wasn't just taking my money. He was taking my home, my independence, my life. "Tomorrow?" I managed to whisper, my throat tight with fear. "Marcus, I don't want to go to a home. I want to stay here." His expression hardened, the mask finally dropping completely. "It's not your choice anymore, Grandma," he said coldly. "I have power of attorney. I have medical authority. And 3 doctors. He pulled papers from his pocket, waving them at me like weapons. 3 doctors have signed statements saying you're no longer competent to live alone. You're a danger to yourself. This is happening, whether you like it or not. The room tilted, the walls closed in, and I realized, with horrible crystalline clarity, that I'd waited too long. I'd been too careful, too patient, too strategic. And now Marcus had won. He was going to lock me away, take everything I had, and there was nothing I could do to stop him. Unless, the thought came to me like a whisper in the dark, like James's voice from beyond the grave. Unless I stopped playing defense and went on the attack. Sandra was talking now, explaining the facility, the care I'd receive, how lucky I was to have such a devoted grandson. But I wasn't listening. I was thinking about the recordings on my phone, the documents Keisha had prepared, the hearing scheduled for next week that Marcus didn't know about. And I was thinking about something Carolyn had told me. Sometimes, Dorothy, you have to let them think they've won. You have to let them get so confident, so comfortable, so sure of their victory that they get sloppy. And that's when you strike. So I did something that surprised even me. I smiled, a small, defeated smile that Marcus would interpret as surrender. Okay, I said quietly, my voice breaking just enough to sound genuine. Okay, baby, if you think it's best, I'll go. I'll go tomorrow. The relief on his face was palpable. The woman, Sandra, beamed like she'd just accomplished something wonderful. And Marcus, my treacherous, greedy, murderous grandson, finally relaxed. He thought he'd broken me. He thought he'd won. He had no idea that tomorrow morning, before he could move me to that facility, before he could silence me behind locked doors and controlled medications and visiting hours, I was going to burn his entire world to the ground. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? My grandson had just told me he was locking me away in the morning, stealing my freedom the same way he'd stolen my money, my security, my dignity. But while Marcus went home to celebrate his victory, probably counting my money in his head, planning what he'd buy first, I was making calls. The first was to Keisha. I woke her at 3 a.m, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. He's trying to move me to a facility tomorrow. We need to file for the emergency hearing now, tonight, before sunrise. I could hear her moving, getting dressed, her voice sharpening into the lawyer I needed her to be. I'm on it. Stay calm. Don't let him take you anywhere. If he tries to force you, call 911. This is elder abuse, Dorothy. This is kidnapping. The second call was to Carolyn, who arrived at my house within the hour with 3 other women from church. They set up camp in my living room, witnesses to my sound mind, barriers to anyone who might try to remove me by force. We're not leaving you, Sister Hawkins said firmly, settling into my couch with her purse clutched in her lap like a weapon. That boy wants to take you out of this house. He's going to have to go through all of us first. By 6 a.m, Keisha had filed emergency motions with the court. Petition to revoke power of attorney based on fraud and undue influence. Request for immediate restraining order. Motion for emergency guardianship hearing. And the piece that would destroy Marcus completely. Criminal complaints for forgery, fraud, theft, and exploitation of an elderly person. The documents were delivered to the courthouse at dawn, and by 7, a judge had reviewed them and issued an emergency order. Marcus's power of attorney was temporarily suspended pending investigation. His access to my accounts was frozen, and a court hearing was scheduled for that very afternoon. When the sheriff's deputy arrived at my door at 8 a.m. to serve Marcus with the restraining order and court summons, I was ready. Dressed in my Sunday best, makeup applied carefully, hair styled the way James always loved. I looked every bit the competent, capable woman I'd always been. Not a confused old lady who needed to be put away, but a warrior preparing for battle. Marcus showed up at 9, right on schedule, Sandra the facility coordinator in tow. His face was all false concern, his movements practiced, like he'd done this before. Maybe he had. Maybe I wasn't his first victim. The thought made me sick, but when he knocked on my door and I opened it, he found not a frightened old woman ready to be led away quietly, but me surrounded by 4 church ladies, a lawyer, and a very official-looking deputy sheriff. His face went pale. "What's going on?" he demanded, his voice rising, the smooth mask cracking. "Grandma, who are all these people?" "Mr. Williams," the deputy said, stepping forward with papers in hand, "I need you to step back from the door. You're being served with a restraining order, and a summons to appear in court this afternoon. You are not to contact Mrs. Dorothy Williams, enter her property, or access any of her financial accounts. Violation of this order will result in immediate arrest. I watched Marcus's face cycle through emotions: confusion, anger, fear, and finally, calculation. "This is ridiculous," he said, his voice taking on that smooth, reasonable tone. "I'm her grandson. I have power of attorney. I'm just trying to help her. She's not well. She needs care." He turned to Sandra, gesturing. Tell them about the doctor's reports." But Sandra was backing away, her eyes wide, suddenly realizing she'd been brought into something far more complicated than a simple senior placement. "I'll need to check with my supervisor," she mumbled, already retreating to her car. "This isn't standard procedure." Keisha stepped forward, her voice crisp and professional. "Mr. Williams, that power of attorney was obtained through fraud and forgery. We have evidence. We have recordings. We have forensic analysis of the signatures. And as of 1 hour ago, it's been suspended by court order. You no longer have any legal authority over Mrs. Williams or her assets. Do you understand?" The color drained from his face completely. "You," he looked at me, his eyes wild, accusing. "You've been planning this. You've been lying to me." The irony of his words, the sheer audacity, nearly made me laugh, but I kept my voice steady, cold as winter frost. "No, baby, you've been lying to me. For months, stealing from me, forging my name, planning to lock me away so I couldn't stop you. But I did stop you, and now you're going to face what you've done." He lunged toward me then, rage replacing the smooth facade, but the deputy was faster, stepping between us, hand on his weapon. "Mr. Williams, you need to leave this property immediately. If you don't comply, I will arrest you right now for violating the restraining order." Marcus stood there, trembling with fury, his hands clenched into fists, and for a moment I saw it. The real him. Not the grieving grandson I'd comforted, not the successful businessman he pretended to be, but a predator who'd been caught, cornered, desperate. He pointed at me, his finger shaking. "You're going to regret this," he hissed. "You don't know what you're doing. You're a confused old woman. No one's going to believe you." I met his eyes without flinching. "The courtroom will believe the evidence," I said quietly. "And that's all that matters." The hearing that afternoon was brutal. Marcus showed up with his own lawyer, a slick-talking man who tried to paint me as mentally unstable, forgetful, a danger to myself. But Keisha was ready. She presented bank statements showing systematic theft, forensic reports proving the signatures were forged, my recent cognitive tests showing I was sharp as ever, recordings of Marcus threatening me, manipulating me, admitting his control, and testimony from my doctor, my pastor, my friends, all confirming I was of sound mind and body. The judge, a black woman in her 60s with steel in her eyes, listened to everything. Then she looked at Marcus with the kind of cold fury reserved for those who prey on the vulnerable. "Mr. Williams," she said, her voice cutting through the courtroom like a blade, "what you've done to your grandmother is not just immoral, it's criminal. You forged legal documents. You stole hundreds of thousands of dollars. You attempted to institutionalize her against her will to cover your crimes. This court finds clear and convincing evidence of elder abuse, financial exploitation, and fraud. The power of attorney is hereby permanently revoked. All assets are to be returned to Mrs. Williams immediately, and I am referring this case to the District Attorney for Criminal Prosecution. Bail is set at $100,000. Marcus's face went white. His lawyer tried to object, but the judge cut him off. "This hearing is concluded. Bailiff, take Mr. Williams into custody." Watching the handcuffs click around his wrists, watching him be led away still sputtering protests and threats, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph, not satisfaction, just a deep, aching sadness. Because that was Angela's son. That was the boy I'd raised. And somewhere along the way, he'd become someone I didn't recognize, someone capable of cruelty I couldn't have imagined. As I walked out of the courthouse, Keisha beside me, Carolyn and the church ladies surrounding me like a protective shield, reporters called out questions. "Mrs. Williams, how does it feel to get justice? What do you want to say to other seniors facing similar abuse?" I stopped, turned to the cameras, and said something I'd been holding inside for months. If you're an elder and someone you trust is isolating you, controlling your money, making you doubt your own mind, listen to that voice inside you that says something's wrong. Trust your instincts. Ask for help. Because predators count on our silence. They count on our shame. They count on us being too embarrassed to admit that someone we love is hurting us. Don't give them that power. Fight back. You're stronger than you think. If that message helps even one person recognize what's happening to them and get help, then share this story. Because we have to protect each other. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal proceedings. The district attorney filed charges, 12 counts of fraud, forgery, theft, and elder abuse. The forensic accountants traced every stolen dollar, every forged signature, every fraudulent transaction. The evidence was overwhelming. Marcus tried to make a deal, pleading guilty to lesser charges in exchange for returning the money and avoiding prison time. But I wouldn't allow it. I sat in the prosecutor's office and said clearly, firmly, no deals. He needs to face the full consequences of what he's done, not just for me, but for every other grandmother he might have victimized if we let him walk away. The prosecutor, a sharp young man who reminded me a little of what I'd hoped Marcus would become, nodded with respect. We'll take it to trial, he said, and we'll make sure he never does this to anyone else. The trial took 3 weeks. I had to sit there, day after day, listening to the evidence, watching Marcus lie on the stand, claiming I'd given him permission for everything, claiming I was confused, claiming he was just trying to help. His lawyer painted me as a bitter old woman who'd forgotten what she'd agreed to, who was punishing a loving grandson for trying to protect her. But the evidence didn't lie. The forged signatures didn't lie. The recordings didn't lie. And when the jury came back after just 4 hours of deliberation, the verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all counts. Marcus's face crumbled. He looked at me across the courtroom, and for just a moment I saw the boy I'd raised. Scared, small, lost. But then I remembered what he'd done. How he'd planned to lock me away. How he'd stolen my life savings. How he'd forged life insurance policies and maybe, just maybe, planned to help me die early to collect. And my sympathy evaporated like morning dew. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. The judge gave him 8 years in prison, with restitution ordered for every penny stolen plus damages. 8 years. He'd be in his mid-30s when he got out, his life permanently marked by felony convictions. Part of me wanted to feel victorious. Part of me wanted to feel satisfied. But mostly, I just felt tired. Tired and sad and somehow older than my 72 years. After the sentencing, I went home to my house, the house I'd almost lost, and I sat in James's old recliner. The late afternoon light streamed through the windows, painting everything gold. The house was quiet, too quiet, because for all the justice I'd won, for all the money I'd recovered, I couldn't get back what Marcus had really stolen. Trust, family, the belief that the people you love won't hurt you. Those things, once broken, don't fully heal. They leave scars that ache on cold nights when you're alone with your memories. But I'd learned something through this nightmare. I'd learned I was stronger than I knew. I'd learned that asking for help isn't weakness, it's survival. I'd learned that justice might be slow, but it's possible if you fight for it. And I'd learned that sometimes the greatest act of love is holding someone accountable for their actions, even when it breaks your heart. Especially then. I spent the recovered money carefully. Some went to my church's elder advocacy program. Some went to fund legal aid for seniors facing financial abuse. And some I kept for myself, for my future, for my security, because I'd earned it. Every dollar, every cent, with decades of hard work and sacrifice. And no one, not even someone I loved, had the right to take it from me. The house felt different now, safer somehow. I changed the locks, installed a security system, made it truly mine again. I joined more community groups, reconnected with friends I'd let drift away during those dark months when Marcus was isolating me. I took a watercolor painting class, something I'd always wanted to try but never had time for. I lived, fully, freely, on my own terms. 6 months after the trial, I received a letter. From Marcus, from prison. The envelope sat on my kitchen table for 3 days before I could bring myself to open it. When I finally did, my hands shook as I unfolded the pages. Dear Grandma, it began, and I almost couldn't read further, but I forced myself. He wrote about his regrets, his shame, his understanding now of what he'd done. He wrote about therapy he was getting in prison, about facing the addiction to money and status that had driven him to destroy the person who loved him most. He wrote asking not for forgiveness because he said he didn't deserve it, but for a chance, someday, years from now, to try to make amends, to try to become the grandson I'd hoped he could be. I read it 3 times, and then I did something that surprised me. I wrote back, not to forgive him, not to excuse what he'd done, but to say that I hoped he truly was changing, that I hoped he'd use these years to become better, and that maybe, a long time from now, when he'd proven through actions, not words, that he was a different man, we could talk, maybe. But that day wasn't today, and it might never come. Some betrayals cut too deep to fully heal, but I wanted him to know I was choosing to live my life fully despite what he'd done to me, that he hadn't broken me. He'd tested me, hurt me, nearly destroyed me, but I was still standing, still here, still Dorothy Mae Williams, survivor, fighter, warrior. As I sealed that letter and walked to the mailbox, the evening air cool against my skin, I thought about Angela, my daughter, how she'd asked me with her dying breath to take care of her son. I'd tried. God knows I'd tried. But sometimes taking care of someone means letting them face the consequences of their choices. Sometimes love means saying no, setting boundaries, protecting yourself even from family. I'd done what I could. The rest was up to Marcus. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and pink. The same sky I'd watched for 72 years, through joy and sorrow, through love and loss, through betrayal and redemption. It was still beautiful. Life was still beautiful, despite everything, because of everything. I walked back into my house, locked the door behind me, and smiled. A real smile this time. Not the fake one I'd worn for Marcus, not the brave one I'd forced for the cameras, but a genuine smile of a woman who'd fought for herself and won, who'd faced her darkest nightmare and survived it, who'd learned that she was never as alone or as weak as she'd feared. The house wrapped around me like a warm blanket, safe, secure, mine. And as I made myself dinner, as I settled in to watch my favorite show, as I prepared for another ordinary evening in my extraordinary life, I whispered a prayer, not for Marcus, not for justice which had already been served, but for every grandmother, every elder, every vulnerable person facing what I'd faced. I prayed they'd find their strength, find their voice, find their warriors, because we all deserve to live our final years in peace, in dignity, in safety. We all deserve to trust that the people we love won't destroy us. And when that trust is broken, we all deserve justice. My name is Dorothy Mae Williams. I'm 72 years old, and I learned the hardest way possible that betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from the people who should protect you most. But I also learned something equally important, that you're never too old to fight back, never too old to demand justice, never too old to reclaim your life. And if my story can help even one person recognize the signs, trust their instincts, and get help before it's too late, then every painful moment was worth it. Because in the end, we're all just trying to survive in a world that sometimes seems designed to break us. But we don't have to break. We can bend. We can adapt. We can fight. And we can win. Not every battle. Not every day. But enough. Enough to matter. Enough to make a difference. Enough to look in the mirror and recognize the person staring back, strong, scarred, surviving. The night deepened outside my windows. The house settled into its familiar creaks and whispers. And I sat in James's old chair, a cup of tea warming my hands, and I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. Real peace. Not the kind that comes from victory, though that helped, but the kind that comes from knowing you did what was right, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. Tomorrow, I'd wake up and live another day, and another after that, building a life that was truly mine, surrounded by people who valued me, respected me, loved me without trying to own me. I'd made mistakes. I'd trusted too much, loved too blindly, ignored warning signs I should have seen. But I'd also fought back. I'd reclaimed myself. I'd survived. And in the end, that was enough. That was everything.